So I've been doing some research using online resources, my previous experience, but also by simply asking people that are applying for a job at Amazon over what are the most interesting points that they wish they knew before interviewing at Amazon. And next I'm going to present you with the 10 most interesting aspects that you could improve while preparing for the Amazon interview. Now, this may sound like an obvious one, but believe me, this happens all the time. And in fact, it's not all that hard to picture yourself with 5 people in front of you that are tasked to ask you difficult questions. It's only normal that you sometimes get stuck. Now, what can you do about it? Well, in the first place, don't even think about asking them for another question, or not even think about the possibility of not being able to answer this question, because put it like this: they are the customers, so you should show customer obsession into all this. And furthermore, this includes the scenario if they ask you for some failure story, but you're a recent graduate with no previous work experience. And even if they ask you for your latest innovation, but you don't want to spill the beans, there is always a way to adapt to a given situation, and this is the key here. One of the most common reactions after being asked a tough question is to stay quiet. And I don't mean to stay quiet for 2 or 3 seconds, but to stay quiet for half a minute or even 1 minute, or even to ask a recruiter for a 2 minutes break to think for an answer. Now, a better approach here would be to simply start thinking out loud about an answer to this question, or maybe if the question was not clear enough, maybe just ask some follow-up questions. Or the idea is to start brainstorming immediately. And the reason why I'm saying this, because the recruiter's end goal is a lot more in understanding how you approach the challenge represented by that question than in the answer itself. So remember that your goal here is to put up a great show, and the more breaks you insert there, the less probability that it will sound nice, just like with this video. You probably know about Amazon's 14 leadership principles, and you probably even expect to be asked a few questions about these principles during the interview. But what not many people realize is that Amazon is all about these principles, so you should really know them like the back of your hand. And even if you don't memorize them, I'd say a good plan here would be to simply prepare stories for each of these 14 leadership principles. Because this is also a great strategy to have an answer for pretty much any question. Like most companies, Amazon uses behavioral interviewing to assess how people react to different circumstances. Now, there are many people that assume that simply knowing about the STAR method is enough to get ready for these types of questions, when in fact behavioral interviewing is best prepared through practice. It is all about the stories that you prepare for the 14 leadership principles, and it is all about practicing to answer the most common behavioral questions. And you can even have more than one answer for those most common behavioral questions. So even if it may sound like a lot, this is pretty much all that it is to the behavioral part of the Amazon interview. Now, this one may be a bit in contrast with the behavioral interviewing part, but it basically refers to people that end up watching Jeff Bezos talking about Amazon's culture for hours. And so to be clear here, the most important part of the Amazon interview is testing for your know-how. The most important thing you could ever do to prepare for any interview is to know your role, to be well prepared for that role. And this is especially true for the AWS interview. Talking about failure is tough, and this is particularly true for younger people that also have a reaction of making it sound like it wasn't that bad, when in fact this is a mistake actually, because your interviewers end goal is to evaluate your critical thinking and your ability to communicate. Now, how do you get prepared for this failure story? Well, it's pretty straightforward. You should prepare a failure story in advance. And furthermore, you should try to avoid putting yourself in an extremely negative position here. Instead, you could also try to focus more on the learnings from that situation. Now, the setup for the on-site interview is quite clear. There will be multiple people asking you tough questions and follow-up questions with the main goal of Amazon avoiding hiring BS artists. Now, I've heard this from other people myself, and I believe it's a great strategy. If you don't feel like you're gonna be able to put up a great show and to have a clear mind for the on-site interview, you could try to reschedule it for another time. So it's not by accident that one of Amazon's leadership principles is to dive deep, because during the on-site interview, for instance, one of the main goals of those interviewers is to understand very well how you think and to ask you as many follow-up questions as possible, because their end goal is to avoid hiring BS artists. So one good piece of advice here would be to spend time to remember everything that you mention, all the projects that you talk about in your CV, because when being asked such a question, you should focus on answering the question efficiently. You should focus on the communication side of things, rather to spend a few seconds on trying to remember more details about that given scenario. This one is actually a recommendation coming from more than one Amazon recruiters, and it's pretty straightforward to understand, but I'll just say this: when evaluating the way that you're going to react and to answer some questions, also consider that the recruiter, that recruiter that you're talking to, is also interviewing hundreds and probably thousands of other people, so they are really good at what they're doing. And not only that, but you'll be interviewing with many people during the interview, so probably your initial choice of whether to go to be yourself or to play someone else's role there would have to be consistent throughout the interviewing process. And finally, let me give you 3 rather classic pieces of advice when it comes to your resume. The first one is to really focus on your strengths and on your accomplishments and show curiosity in your CV. The second one is to avoid name dropping your position title on your resume. For instance, if you worked for Google or the New York Times, that might be impressive, but does not tell the recruiter a whole lot about yourself. So instead, try to focus on communicating what you've done in the position quite clearly. For instance, you helped grow revenue by 500% for a period of 1 year to $5 million, instead of just saying that you helped to grow revenue. And finally, while this will not disqualify you from the interview, typos will certainly play a negative role to all this. And believe me when I tell you that this happens a lot more often than many people realize. So you can see here that nothing is rocket science from this advice, and in fact some of them are pretty easy fixes. So hopefully you found them useful for your interview at Amazon, and thank you very much for watching.